This week, it is Valentine's Day, so there's love associated with the day. There is love in the air, and someone with love in his name, Harry Sverdlove, is here with us in studio. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Edgewise. He'll be here for an interview to talk about the future of firewalls. In our technical segment, I will launch the first part in a several-part series on enterprise-ish network security hardware and software that we've incorporated here at Security Weekly, along with some other sites with some testing. So we'll talk about the first parts, which are the hardware and the software that we're working with. In the security news, why it's way too easy to sell counterfeit goods on Amazon, how to defend against the Run-C container vulnerability, creating a dream team for your new age cybersecurity team, how you can get a Windows 95 emulator for Windows 10, Linux or Mac. DEF CON goes to Washington. There are podcasts that can take your computer skills to the next level. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. Organizations' internal networks are overly permissive and can't distinguish trusted from untrusted applications. Attackers abuse this condition to move laterally through networks, bypassing address-based controls to spread malware. Edgewise abstracts security policies away from traditional network controls that rely on IP addresses, ports, and protocols, and instead ties controls directly to applications. Edgewise allows organizations to analyze the network attack surface and segment workloads based on the software and how it's communicating. Edgewise monitors applications and protects data paths using zero-trust segmentation. Visit edgewise.net/Security Weekly to get your free month of visibility. Some restrictions apply. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then Gravwell is the solution for you. Gravwell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. Gravwell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/Security Weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today.
And welcome to the show. And on this Valentine's Day, let me introduce you to a man that we love to love, especially on Thanksgiving, Mr. Paul Sidorian.
Welcome to Paul's Security Weekly. This is episode 594, recorded on February 14th, in case you hadn't guessed that already, 2019, in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, Mr. Larry Pesce.
Yay!
You're back again. You're back.
I know. It's crazy. And it was 3 weeks with the kids because my wife was away and babysitter and that stuff. And then I had a management meeting in Seattle last week. And
is that what you call hanging out with Mike Poor making knives?
That was afterwards. We had last week was management meeting, and then the weekend, and then this week was hanging out making knives.
I see.
And
so when Mike picks you up from the airport, that's when you have your meeting, and then the rest of the time is knife making. Is that what I heard?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much. and I had the red eye home last night, so I got in at 1 o'clock today, and now here I am.
Well, welcome back, Larry.
Woo-hoo.
Nice to have you back in studio.
Yes.
Harry Sverdlove is here in studio with Limoncello. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for having me. It's
And you've shared with me your homemade limoncello.
It is, and I got to give credit to my wife. She makes the limoncello.
Okay.
And this is my gift to you instead of roses.
Oh,
that's a beautiful day.
That's very nice. I'd much prefer alcoholic beverages to flowers.
I would have brought some homemade knives, but apparently I don't know how to make knives.
Well, yeah, I know a guy, a couple of guys.
A couple of guys.
So how do you make limoncello?
It's actually this is the creamy limoncello, not that other crap. So you take.
I thought you were going to say, I don't know, my wife makes it, like that's her thing, which would be totally fair.
No, you take grain alcohol, which you can't get in Massachusetts. You got to go to Connecticut.
Yeah.
And you put lemon zest in it, and you let it soak for 3 weeks. And then you take milk, and you boil it, and I don't know, it's some sort of separation thing.
Sure.
And so you scoop out the goopy stuff on top, and you do this 3 times, and then you take the milk and the alcohol, the grain alcohol, and you pour it all together, and you mix it in some cool folding process, and then you cheesecloth strain it 3 different times.
Wow.
Get all the goopy stuff out, and then you drink it cold.
That's really cool. Yeah, very cold, right? It's freezer. The glasses are. It's like a martini.
Exactly.
Vodka has to be frozen. Glasses have to be frozen.
And what I didn't tell you now, it tastes like a sorbet or something like that.
It's delicious.
It's pure grain alcohol, so just be
this
careful.
is going to be an interesting show. We're going to switch to wine after this, so I don't fall off my chair. Also,
one might argue you're whining already.
Yes. I've been known to do that. Mr. Patrick Laverty is here in studio. Patrick, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul. I definitely love being here on Valentine's Day. And I thought we discussed the way that you're supposed to be drinking. That is always
pinky out.
Pinky out. Yeah, we got to have the pinky out.
Pinky's out.
Yeah, the subtitle for this episode should
have
be
a couple of them,
and our wives are pissed.
Else out.
Yes. Actually, my wife was working today, too. So we were like, hey, it's Valentine's Day. Going to work. Me too. Okay. See you tomorrow. It's, it happens that way. It's all good. It's all good. We get all weekend to celebrate Valentine's Day, right?
Yeah.
Romantic dinners and stuff, totally overrated.
Overrated. So unless you've been to some of our Security Weekly dinners, we'll invite you next time. Mr. Jeff Mann is on the lines remotely. Mr. Jeff Mann, how are you?
Doing well, Paul. We love you. We love working on Valentine's Day, even though my wife's not too crazy about it. And the goopy stuff in the lemonade process, curds, and what's left over is whey.
Oh, just like the
Mary Tuffet woman.
Yeah.
No way.
It's like how you make cheese, only you keep the goopy stuff and you throw out the liquid. So I'm glad to hear that, if you were being really resourceful, you'd keep the goopy stuff and make cheese, and the leftover you make this delicious beverage that I'm jealous that I don't get to try. But I've got my bottle of Lagavulin 16.
Ooh,
so I'm hanging out. Yes.
Mr. Joff Thayer is on the lines remotely as well. Joff, welcome to the program.
Yeah, here I am, my electrons in the flesh. So I got way ahead of you guys. I actually took my wife out last night. See, very smart.
Good job, Joff. That's why that's why you're Joff. Always the romantic,
and that's okay.
Always
Joff,
thinking of the romance.
Because Joff, I took your wife out for lunch.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
It was Burger King, but
that's nothing compared to what my brother did to your wife.
Wow. We'll let that roasting smell, that burning smell clear. Wow. And while it's doing that, the RSA Conference 2019 is coming up March 4th through the 8th. RSAconference.com/securityweekly-US19. Register using the discount code 5U9SWFD. Get $100 off. If you'd like to do a briefing with us or a paid interview or both, go to securityweekly.com/conference request. You can do that for all of the conferences that we've set up so far, RSA and InfoSec World. Let's see. Harry is here with us. You are the CTO and founder, correct?
I am the CTO and co-founder.
Co-founder. And previously you were at Carbon Black,
I was the CTO for Carbon Black for 8.5 years.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
And now you're here tonight on Paul Security Weekly, hanging with us. And I wanted to just set up, I think, what we're primarily going to be talking about tonight. And it stems from an earlier conversation I had today. And I said, when I was thinking about this problem of application separation and how we're not really doing so much firewalling now for our applications, that it's totally different. It's DevOps, it's containers, it's serverless. And when I was doing firewalling at the university, and Joff were just having I were having a network nerd moment before the show, but I would get applications, whether they were locally written, installed, or purchased from a vendor. They'd show up on the network, and I would ask the developers, the creators of the software, the vendor, I'd say, hey, which firewall ports do you need open for that application? And most of the time it was blank stares, questions, or the answer of just all of them? Oh, so you're using all of the ports and protocols. That's awesome. And so what scares me is that in today's world, we're providing that level of separation. And I'm not there to ask the questions oftentimes. And if someone is asking the questions, who's got the answers?
Right. You've got definitely a number of problems. The first is the language is totally different. Exactly what you said. So you're in a containerized environment. You've got Kubernetes. You've got pods going everywhere. What ports are you opening?
Right.
What addresses? And so the network operator and the application developer and the DevOps, they don't speak the same language. So that's part of the reason to look at network security differently is to say, well, wait a second, let's stop saying that. Let's say, I've got an application, here's its identity, and there's what it has to talk to. The other problem is, so let's say somebody said to you, okay, I need you to open up port 22. So you open up port 22, but from where to where? Typically, they'll say, well, it's going to be somewhere over here. So you set up a subnet there and a subnet there. You basically end up with as close to an any-to-any as you get. And then all of a sudden, what happens if a different application comes along and uses the same port? Or that application comes along and starts doing funky things. You have no real control over. You're basically putting security on the highway when you're trying to secure the car.
Right. Yeah, there's multiple there's multiple layers in networking, right? Yeah. But when we think about the physical layer and then the virtual layer, but even on top of the virtual layer, there's the container layer that has its own networking that you have to define. So it's almost like we have to do this
and
multiple
it's getting
times.
more and more complex. And the whole point of a network is to work, is to facilitate communication. The whole point of security is to restrict communication. So you set up your network, and essentially that's why we talk about this idea of overexposure. You allow everything because it's too complicated to try and micromanage, and what you've done instead is you've introduced more risk.
Right. And God forbid we have to respond to a security incident or troubleshoot a problem in today's world when it comes down to communications. Because some of the ways we'll think of it is, well, okay, there's one application, it's a few containers, and we're deploying it, and now we've got multiple environments. That's complicated in and of itself. Organizations have progressed to the point today where there's tens and tens of thousands of applications. Never mind the environments for those specific applications, that each application has multiple containers and multiple environments. So this quickly can spiral. How are people doing this today, Harry? Going back to my example of asking the app developer what ports do you need open, fast forwarding to today where there's 10,000 containers running and they all have to have some type of controls around them.
Well, show me a security analyst that doesn't look burnt out.
Yeah,
and you start to get the answer. So they've got tens of thousands, or at least hundreds, if not thousands, of applications running on ephemeral ports, running on elastic environments. So you've got terabytes of IP data going every day, and now there's an incident. And so you're sitting there trying to connect dots from one medium to another, going from terabytes to hundreds of thousands, all because you need to figure out, well, which system was breached, what application was doing what, where was it talking, and the answer is, it's really hard. If you talk to a lot of the FUD today, the answer is, well, it's going to be solved by artificial intelligence in the cloud. But until that happens, it's actually a struggle. It's a huge problem, and you're basically looking at the wrong data to try and solve the problem. And that's one of the reasons why I founded Edgewise, which was to try and get the problem, or at least the data that we collect, closer to what it is we're trying to protect.
Yeah, because it's no longer about, an application doesn't really live on one physical system that we racked in the data center. Like when we were at Brown, Patrick, right? We'd rack a server in the data center, we'd put an operating system on it, we'd put Apache on it, PHP, whatever, and we'd put an app on it, and then we'd go do security.
We'd put all the apps on it.
We'd put all the apps on it, yes. But today it's just so different.
No, now it appears over there, and then, it's high load, so 10 of them appear over there.
Yes,
and then we pop up 10 more systems over there. The app is moving, but the identity of the app isn't moving. The IP addresses, the layer 3 that we're trying to create firewalls for, they're constantly either changing or we're going to wildcard them. And so the form factor has basically changed. And then, of course, you have the challenge that, well, if you're really in a cloud, you're not using hardware. You're not plugging into a tap. You're not tapping into a switch somewhere. So you're ending up rerouting all this traffic somewhere else so that you can do deep packet inspection and try and figure stuff out.
Try and make decisions. But if everything's changing that you're trying to protect, how do you?
You don't.
We can't protect it with a traditional firewall. That's why I think even the term application firewall is not. It's not appropriate anymore. I feel like we need a different term to describe what we're talking about.
Which is why I'm not in marketing, although everybody is a CMO. If you drink enough alcohol, at least. So
that's a fantastic quote.
A couple more of these, I'll be the CMO. But what do we call this? Is application? We have application-aware firewalls. We have application segmentation. Maybe we talk about layer 8 or layer 9 if you want to use sort of layer terminology.
We call layer 8 the human element.
Oh yeah, we love layer 8.
That's the name of the conference that Patrick runs here in Rhode Island. It's called Layer 8.
You have a conference called Layer 8?
Yeah, Layer 8 conference, all about social engineering and OSINT, yeah.
So Layer 8's the human on top of that?
Exactly.
Yes.
So then I would be Layer 11 because my dial goes.
Goes to 11.
My dial goes to 11. So we do a Layer 11. We need to think about things differently. And I coming from the carbon black days, if you will, where we needed to start thinking about antivirus differently. There's got to be a better way instead of just constantly doing malware signatures to find out things bad. How do we
playing whack-a-mole?
Whack-a-mole. How do we do that differently? And it took 25 years for the industry to start saying, antivirus is okay, but it's not really solving my problem. It's been 30 years that the base technology, which is basically packet inspection, IP, port protocol, maybe the first 4 packets you do some inspection on. We've been doing that now for 30 years. And how much has changed in 30 years? There was no cloud then. There was no IoT. There was no BYOD. There was no elasticity. And yet the form factor and the technologies we've been using haven't changed as much. And so there needs to be better words. And maybe in a couple more limoncellos, I'll actually know the exact word to tell you. It'll be magical.
It's going to be, I can't wait.
It's going to be the best word
Go ahead,
ever.
Joff.
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, it was interesting today. I was doing a little bit of reading on the evolution of networking, in particular as it applies to the security context. And somewhere around about 2011, 2012, software-defined networking started to take hold, where they're separating the control plane away from the data plane and yielding abilities to start moving the enforcement point in the security context much closer to the application. And I'm wondering how you feel in the world of open flow and software-defined networking. It's already entered the world of operating system virtualization. Do you think software-defined networking is going to migrate further up the stack into the containerized world as well? And do you think there's a play there?
Yeah, well, I do think, it already is doing that with different software-defined mesh networks, and others are moving deeper or higher up the stack, if you will. The software-defined networking still, though, as a solution or as a framework, is all about the facilitation. It's about enabling communication. It really is more about how do I make sure that everything can reach everything that I need in this virtualized elastic world. And so I do think that one of the challenges is it's not a security solution. In fact, it's an insecurity solution, but it's a necessary thing in a virtualized network. I
feel like there's an application there, though, because one of the traditional problems that we had in communication security, if you go back to the baseline, we're talking 20 years ago, is, there was a box, a brick or whatever, and it had plumbing in and plumbing out. And, that was our enforcement point. Whereas, it's my belief that software-defined networking, with the appropriate control plane facilitation, allows you to move that enforcement point much closer to the actual application. And so there is definitely a security context there that perhaps just hasn't been explored yet.
Yeah, no, I do think the control plane has to move closer. The question is it going to be at a point in time, even on a virtualized network, or are you moving the control plane actually into the application or into the container, moving it as close as possible to the thing making the communication? The closer you get to that asset, the more secure your communications or the more powerful your control plane becomes, as opposed to a point in time where we've learned it's okay, but it's kind of like, what are those turnstiles that you see in subways or something? It's a point in time where something has to cross through. And there'll always be ways to either spoof that or if you basically bypass the control plane, which happens, then you've basically jumped the turnstile. So I do think that, software-defined networking, if it's as it gets closer and closer to the container, to the actual, not just the container, but the process within the container, the service within the container that's actually doing the communication, that's where you're going to really start getting the kind of power that you need to get.
Yeah, I think that's right. I see an opportunity as I was doing my reading today that, if you can get an integration of the software-defined networking control plane APIs that are able to actually reach into the virtualized infrastructure at all layers, both the operating system virtualization, but then further up the stack into the actual application virtualization, as well as reaching across cloud and on-prem, then suddenly we're back in the ball game where no longer do we have these physically plumbed devices. We've actually abstracted our control plane completely out of the physical device and turned that into an API that can control in an agnostic way across the entire infrastructure. And I think that's the golden thing we're all ultimately after, that hasn't happened yet, to transform the paradigm from 10, 20 years back up until now. Right now, I think we're flailing around with a lack of ability to actually get right up close to that application. And the vendors just haven't caught up yet.
Right. No, I think there's no question. If you think, what are they able to do today? They're able to get down to, layer 7, because I guess layer 8 has been hijacked by humans. But if you get to layer 7, so the best they can do is say, okay, I can't get to you. I can't get to your identity, but I'm going to look at some of the packets and what you're communicating, and I'm going to try and divine things. I'm going to try and divine that this is the user token you're using. Or, hey, you look like SQL to me, so I think you're, SQL Server, or I think you're a certain application based on some signature, and it's a little bit of reading tea leaves. It's faking getting closer to the application. It's not actually what is the identity of the thing you're trying to control.
Right, and I think the other issue is that what we're seeing is primarily a sort of a fallback to the north-south traffic, to put it in actual communications terms, and we're losing the east-west visibility. Because if the east-west traffic is all sitting in the virtualized container environment, then there's a lot of flows going on from a pure on-the-wire thing that are just occurring in software that nobody can see anymore, and nobody has visibility into it. And until we actually get the APIs to actually have software switching and software firewalling distributed out, or software IPS distributed out into those flows, we're never going to have that visibility. But I do see that there is a potential future there with protocols such as OpenFlow. It's sort of convenient that I was reading about that today, because it kind of plays into this whole discussion.
Yeah,
I think some of the software-defined networking that I've seen in the new ways we do VPNs are really wrong, in that we're taking everyone's traffic and we're funneling it through a virtual software-defined network that's then trusted by this other software-defined network. And in order to access it, all your traffic has to go up into this virtual network. That's the wrong. It's not close enough to the application.
Right,
as
exactly.
We're
we're actually, in many senses, you're moving the control plane further away to another virtualized location that somebody else has to deal with. That's as in virtual distances, virtually kilometers away from where you need to be.
I'm sorry, that's the key selling point, though, I think, is the quote-unquote somebody else has to deal with it, perceived or otherwise.
What you actually need, though, is distributed, consistent policy, no matter what the ingress point of the traffic is, ultimately.
Right.
And that's where, protocols such as OpenFlow and its ilk, if the data plane side of that is actually defined well to accept that management protocol communication and pushed right up to the edge of the app, you can then go back to a world where you have consistent policy deployed in a distributed manner, which is really the nirvana we're all after, because we've lost the ability to control those choke points. It just doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. Like Paul was just saying, that the whole idea of like steering everybody through one funnel is just long gone. From a user application perspective, it's just not feasible anymore.
Although it's making a comeback in software-defined perimeters.
It is, yes,
So-
yes.
Well,
Yes. And I can't remember the vendors' names that do that off the top of my head, but there's a whole space.
There's a whole space
that's
on
doing
that, and it really is about, they call it VPN-less, but essentially it's a reverse proxy.
Yeah.
And it's steering
Exactly
everybody to
what
one
it is.
place, make a decision, and then rerouting them
Right.
someplace else.
Yes, yes.
I mean, it does beg the question, though. Should we? I sort of started this off in the world of communication security, and as you start looking at the traditional layer 3, layer 4 stuff, essentially that has become useless as enforcement points anyway, and we all know that. But inspection at the application layer is not useless as a potential enforcement point. So I still think we do need the ability to distribute that perimeter out, and we need the intelligence to do the application layer inspection to actually be able to write that policy rule down to that distributed perimeter. And I think that's the piece we're missing.
Yeah, and well, that is, you know, in fact, as a concept and the idea of distributing down to the layer of the application, right, close as possible as we can get, and establishing provenance and trust on that application. That is what Edgewise. That's the whole purpose of the technology that we've designed and built, which is to get us closer to that stage where your distributed policies are pushed out and decision points are made as close as possible to the thing, let's just say, that whose communication you're trying to ascertain or control.
Sorry,
on,
Jeff.
On that,
Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff.
Please. Are you looking? Are you considering the software-defined networking world, or are you steering away from that right now?
We're definitely considering it. We're not steering away from that. For us right now, that's an enablement platform in which we can utilize. But right now, our goal is we sit basically between the operating system and the application layer, whether it's inside of a container or not, and using that as a basis to ascertain who's making the connection, what's the identity, the routing path it might take afterwards. We're less interested in, and part of the point, I think, of where we're going is the route doesn't matter as much. You guys were talking before about lag and other things. There's a lot of routing involved. It doesn't matter. What matters is the source and the destination. Are these two things authorized to communicate? If it's going to fail over to a different server or to a cluster or split between two things, who cares if it's talking to the right thing?
Yep.
And so so for us, software-defined networking is an enabling technology.
Which instance of the app and its IP address doesn't
matter at all.
It's the app,
right? Yeah. And that's part of the point of having something more maintainable, which is you create a policy, and that policy, however you describe it, and it's not described that has to be retranslated. You know, this application can talk to this database. That's the policy. If the database moves to Hong Kong, well, maybe not. Bad example.
Maybe not China.
Maybe not China. All right, well, forget China. But if it moves someplace else, maybe from U.S. East to U.S. West, how about that?
Sure.
That's fine. It doesn't matter as long as it's still the identity. Now, if it's compromised and it's somebody pretending to be the database, but it's not, now you have a problem.
Google and Wendy Nather from Duo was on the show last year, I believe, or the year before, but she was talking about Google's initiative for it. Did they call it Zero? What did they call that?
Beyond Corp.
Beyond Corp.
Yeah, they actually call it Beyond Corp. That's their Zero Trust initiative.
Yeah.
And it's primarily focused, by the way, it is more SDP. It's focused from
the user perspective.
From the user perspective.
Not the application perspective. But it's a similar concept in that.
Absolutely.
They don't care where I am, right? Maybe what device I'm using, they care a little bit about if it's vulnerable, but they care about who I am, can I prove who I am, and associating it with a role in the application.
Right. I think the key points and it applies whether you're doing inside out, which is your east-west traffic, or outside in your north-south traffic, is first they need to ascertain identity. How do I trust who you are?
Right.
And then they don't make the decision at a point in time. They make the decision continuously based on your environment. So who you are, well, most of us understand multi-factor. Maybe I use a key fob, or I use some method to
I proved that I'm Paul.
You proved that you're Paul. At least we think you are.
Sure.
We're on the fence on this. And then we say, well, okay, you know what? If you are in China, you're still Paul, but you don't get access to our source code.
Yeah.
But you're now in the United States. Now you do get access. Or hey, there's something else happening. In one of the examples that happens with Beyond Corp, you're on a mobile device, but it's unpatched. Your identity is ascertained, but your environment is determined to
questionable,
be questionable, so we're going to limit your access. So the principle there is, first, you have to ascertain identity, and the second is you have to, with each request, ascertain trustworthiness, not just of who you are, but where you are. And that's the principle behind Zero Trust, which is there's this whole idea, never trust, always verify, as opposed to trust but verify.
And that's similar to what you're implementing.
It's exactly the same. Okay. It's exactly the same for non-users. So imagine you're not a user, you're a data center. Your databases, your app servers, there's no human there to sit there with a key fob or to punch in multi-factor. So what is the other factor? Well, if you have one application talking to another, they've already got one factor, which is something they know, the password. They know, I know the password to the database, but what about who they are? That's where identity comes from. And so for what we do is we take cryptographic signatures, we take hashes, we look at loaded modules, we look at even the BIOS ID, the state of the system, and we say, we know who you are and we know what state of your environment it is. Now we can make a decision. We have multi-factor now. We have two things. You know something. We know who you are. Multi-factor for basically non-interactive sessions.
And do you constantly validate that behavior? In other words, like you've got two applications talking to each other, and they're doing okay stuff, and you're like, yeah, this is allowed. But now, Larry or Patrick or Joff comes along, and they're manipulating those requests in some way. Does that change the trust model without actually detecting the attack? Does that change the trust model?
Definitely. And it really does. Part of that depends on, and this is how the technology evolves, what do you define as identity? So, for example, certainly if you change the bits, if Larry comes along and decides, I'm going to change one of the loaded modules, I'm going to inject something into that process, you've changed the memory footprint, you've changed the binary or the executable, you've changed the identity. It's no longer trustworthy. But what if you just start using it in a funky way? So it depends on if we start defining usage as identity. Well, now identity is pretty volatile. So the short answer is it's a balance.
Right, I got you.
And it depends on the environment. Some environments you want to be much more strict and say, look, any perturbation in pattern or in behavior, or if it starts, maybe you start making 10 database connections at a time instead of 3, well, that might be something that would lower my trust. And you might decide that that's something I want to consider. Or you might say, you know what, I want it to be a more liberal environment. I want to ascertain trust, but I want to have some boundaries because things change. I have an application that behaves very differently, or some days Larry decides, he's going to go crazy.
You're weighting all of this behavior in telemetry that you're collecting.
And
obviously using the industry buzz terms, machine learning and AI, but you're weighting all this stuff. And does the user have some influence on those weights or how they're treated?
They absolutely do. Well, and we just got, it's a novel technology. It's a different way of doing control plane. I'm happy that, just actually we got last December or November a patent awarded for the way that we're doing our control plane.
Nice, congrats.
Which is
That's
kind of
awesome.
cool. Yeah, it took years at
previous
employers to do that. And this one took only 18 months.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, it was actually, I'm learning how to speak patentese, which I definitely can't do with limoncello. it's a lot of pluperfect nonsense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But, and part of that is there's identity, there's environment, and then and the two together, you can use that to weight risk. It's for now, we're giving the user control over what is their risk tolerance for change of identity and for things. This is where machine learning comes into play, though, is we can see, for example, watching an application run for just 48 hours, you can start seeing, hey, this is its behavior. This is its identity, its behavior. And by the way, it actually changes certain attributes about itself over time. And we're noticing that so we can adapt automatically. But for now, we also want to give the user control because it's, every environment is different. And if I would come to you and say, look, I built an AI, it's sentient, it's Skynet, and you don't have to interact at all because it will always do the right thing. I probably won't be here. I'd be on a yacht somewhere.
Right? Yeah, right. If you could automate that entirely. It sounds like user behavior analytics, but UBA is after the fact, right?
Yeah, and it is, when I look at it in part of my background, I wasn't just CTO at an endpoint security product, but I was also CISO for a while, and I've dealt with a lot of war rooms and a lot of security teams. And this whole idea of net flow analysis, modeling of net flow analysis is nothing short of a nightmare. And especially in a virtualized world, modeling of application flow, which is just people talking to each other. So, for example, imagine if I had to get all of our phone, network, email records and try to match them up just based on all the ways we communicate, it would be a nightmare. But if I just say, who's talking to who? A la the LinkedIn model.
Sure.
I can actually build models, and I can actually look at those and start building baselines very quickly.
How difficult, again, kind of going back to, I've published my own application inside of a container and had to define what talks to what. I was still confused. So are you modeling that for the end users, letting them see it and then, kind of make decisions, right? Because again, going back to, even if I've got a couple of hundred containers, I can't physically go to every, even with Kubernetes, right? I can't go there, like manually mapping that out and then figuring out I need a tool to help me.
And doing that, if you had NetFlow, you'd never be able to do it. It would be impossible. So that's exactly what we do. Within about 48 hours from most environments, some environments are different than others, we're able to get about 99.99% confidence of the model. And by the way, that doesn't mean we're, artificial intelligence. It simply means we've created patterns that predict the next level of communication with 99.99% coverage. And it's simply by watching how applications communicate. But by defining that not in terms of addresses, but in terms of identity, it's much more resilient to the kinds of changes that are going to happen. You know, one of the things that people don't realize is even in your container environments, there's a lot of communication happening not in the container. There's a lot of common services and Active Directory and DNS and things that are happening that, by the way, are also avenues of insecurity.
Yep.
So being able to model not just container. Container isn't a panacea that, oh, if I'm in a container, I'm totally invulnerable to, or impervious.
Yeah. I mean, Run-C showed us that.
As a perfect example. And now they're in. The application might still be doing what it is, but there's another service running inside that container that has all the same communication privileges as your application. And that's why actually looking at what's happening and building a model based on that, it's pretty important.
So when you say application, people may, and I'm sure you've had this happen, interpret that as, oh, it's an application that I wrote and deployed out in some way. When you say application, it could be
anything
SSH, it could be like whatever, right?
It could be anything that either receives communication or requests communication. So it could be an infrastructure service, it could be a third-party thing, it could be your own application. It's not only things you develop, which is one of the challenges we faced, because there are some interesting new technologies in this zero trust networking space that if you have your own code, you're building your own application, you can incorporate libraries to essentially move the control plane literally into the code itself, but that's only good for things you have source code to that you're deploying.
Sure.
And so we wanted to start this and build the technology based on a way that was agnostic to that. You wrote it, great. You didn't write it, great. It came with the operating system, great. Anything that requests or uses network resources is what we consider application. The other word people use is workload, service.
Daemon, whatever.
Daemon.
Yeah, sure. We can debate that later, I guess.
Tomato. Yeah.
Right. It's a really interesting way of looking at zero trust. I think doesn't do it. Hearing you describe it, and then thinking about when I hear zero trust, I feel like it's doing it a disservice. It's so much better than I think zero trust.
Well, I'll let you know. So when we started, zero trust wasn't yet a buzz, even though I know Forrester coined the term 10 years ago, but it wasn't really, it's caught, now everybody's saying zero trust. And being a technologist, when, it started catching on and we were discussing it as a company, hey, we want to talk about this, I was a little skeptic. I'm like, oh, it's just a buzzword, it's FUD. It doesn't describe the totality of, in fact, Gartner hates the term because they're like, well, zero trust, you have to establish trust at some point. It's a starting point, but it's not anything.
Yeah.
But the reason I sort of changed my opinion on that is people need TLAs. They need acronyms. They need shortways. They need something. We can't, like everything else in life, if you can't bottle it in a very quick sentence and describe it, at least at the highest level, your attention span. We're all ADD and it goes away. And zero trust is sort of a way of saying, stop trusting the way we were trusting. Start doing it a different way. It doesn't prescriptively, the term doesn't prescriptively describe what that means, but that's if I've caught your attention, now we can have a real conversation about what zero trust networking means.
I feel like this is something that we've been talking about forever, especially when traditional network firewalls first started coming out. There were many people who were way far ahead of the curve. In fact, I tell my Steve Carmody story all the time. Steve's someone we worked with at Brown.
Always 18 months ahead.
Yeah, in this case, he was like 18 years ahead, Patrick, right? We're talking about firewalls. Now, Steve heads the Shibboleth Federated Identity. And so we were talking about firewalls when I started at the university, and Steve was like, firewalls are a terrible idea. Like, why are we just putting these like stopgaps in the network? And it took me probably a couple of years of talking to Steve, because firewalls were the reason I was there. So obviously I was a little defensive, right? But then in talking to Steve, I was like, he's right. I'm like, he's really ahead of his time in that exactly what we're saying. Applications should know what other applications to trust. In the Google Beyond Corp model, applications should know what users to trust and how. Why do we need these firewalls that really, in his mind, just got in the way? And in fact, now that I've grown up a little, he was right. and like almost 20 years ahead of his time. Have I ever told you that story, Patrick?
Now that your job doesn't depend on firewalls.
Right, exactly. I've been very open about talking about this now,
Firewalls
Patrick.
suck now.
I realize and appreciate how smart and visionary Steve Carmody was.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say about Steve Carmody that this is the guy that was into federated identity back when we were learning about passwords.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's he saying for the future? What's the future hold here?
Right now, we got to go track him down and
let's
get him out
here.
on the show. Yeah,
I've got
He
actually.
was here not all that long.
I was
going to say he was here not all that long ago.
we
but
did
it
an
was
interview with Steve Carmody,
but it was a long time
ago.
It was a long time ago.
Right. I've got a panel at RSA coming up on the future of firewalls 2028. So
He would have been great for that panel,
RM.
And of course, you got the whole gamut from firewall suck and they're dead to firewalls are long live the firewall. You know, the firewall's dead, long live it.
Right.
If you think about what firewalls when they got in the way, for me, it's this whole concept of segmentation, which is least access. That's what you want. You want everything in your network, in your environment, to only have access to what it needs. Now,
I feel like the technology wasn't there.
It wasn't
15, 20 years ago to even conceive of that. So we had to go back to the network, right?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment, actually. I think you're all circling around it. One of the big failings of firewalls, and I think somewhat tangentially a failing of the OSI model, is we never successfully linked the application identity and the user identity with the layer 4 and layer 3 information. And so that gap has plagued that communication security world for as long as we've been doing security and beyond, right? Now, I think there has been, just as you're describing, there's been much better success in that world at linking that application identity and that user identity with the actual flow of information or communication that's occurring, which actually enables the proper securing of the path, which in the traditional layer 3, layer 4 world just didn't happen.
Jeff, I want to get Jeff's take on this. Jeff was working in pen testing and firewall security back in the day when they were first coming on the scene, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, when I started in the commercial world, we were doing vulnerability assessments, and most of it was to try to convince people to install a firewall because they were connecting to the internet, which is the original cloud, by the way. But I was thinking about this the other day because I've been kind of asking people on Twitter the last couple weeks, how many firewall rules is reasonable to have? And because I've been
there's just one, Jeff. It's any allow. That's all you need. Everything works. It's great.
It makes everything work. We're done.
IP any permit, right?
Well, but I was thinking about it the other day, sort of philosophically, because that's what I do. Is like how many holes do you punch in a firewall before it ceases to be a firewall?
One.
And what we've been saying.
Says the full-time penetration tester. Very accurately so.
One.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Because then it's a firewall with a hole in it.
Yes. It's true.
I mean,
a holy firewall.
Yeah.
But I was talking to Marcus, it's probably been a year ago now, because I was thinking, this whole industry has just, started with let's put out firewalls. And I asked him, I said, have you ever imagined what our industry would be like if and he doesn't take credit for inventing the firewall, but, if the firewall had never been invented, what would our industry look like?
Better.
I think it was inevitable that we had some kind of stopgap measure.
That's actually a great question. I want to bring that to my panel at RSA.
It's a good panel question.
Yeah, if there was no firewall, what would life be like?
Because I think it would have eventually evolved into something that restricted access in not the correct way that we're talking about in the context of zero trust networking. I think what I was like, why do I have to manage all these firewall rules? Conceptually, if these applications knew who to trust and people hardened their systems appropriately, why do I need to put something in the way? They really, back to Steve Carmody's point, that really, in the end, just gets in the way.
But the underlying protocols we use don't have a mechanism for establishing trust.
That's a good point.
And Marcus, by the way, hates standards being written by people who haven't used them. So he has a whole rant he does on this.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. Right. But I'm not against, just to be clear, I'm not against firewalls. They're an interesting thing, just like I'm not against highways. We need them to get places, but they're they're just basically broad lanes. They're not security. They're not actually helping define who's allowed to go from place to place. They're just enabling them. So, look, they had a purpose, and in a time and day when, as you said, you had an application you put on a machine in a rack somewhere, that's where it sat. Made total sense. We have customers now, they've got some virtual instance or many, and they're running 12 applications. Obviously, many different services, but let's say 12 business applications, and they're physically on the same IP, or at least the same public IP addresses, against one database server that's actually serving different databases. How do you secure that? You don't secure that through just firewalls and through IP addresses because it doesn't make sense. Basically, you're saying all my apps can talk to all my databases is what you end up saying, and that's a highway, that's not a security.
Right.
I think part of I think what you're saying, and maybe I think about it a slightly different way, but I think we're saying the same thing or thinking the same thing is, from the beginning, we as an industry or we as a civilization have never really tried to tackle, what is the security problem here? What are we trying to solve? And what's the best, most cost-effective way to do that? That seems like it's too complicated, but there's somebody's selling me something that says it's going to solve my problem. Okay, I'll buy one of those or two of those or six of those or 1,000 of those. And you can look at just about every technology product out there today or throughout our brief history and probably come up with a reason why that really didn't need to exist, because it was a panacea, or it was here's an idea. Maybe most of the security technologies throughout our brief history are placebos.
No, or Band-Aids.
Well, I mean, this idea that convenience trumps security, this isn't new, right? It's always been the case that security's been an afterthought. You build an internet-enabled toaster or refrigerator or thermostat, that's what they're building. They're building a function. They don't think, well, what's the potential security? I can actually get your Wi-Fi password, or I know when you're home or not, and all of a sudden there's vulnerabilities. But that wasn't the way we baked it into our thoughts, because security is generally thought of as an inconvenience. So it's not a surprise that we don't design things securely, and then we figure out, well, we got to Band-Aid them. And so you either Band-Aid them in the front door, which is sort of the firewall model, or you try to bring that model closer to what it is you're trying to secure with different levels of resistance. TLS, what is it? TLS 1.3, the new standard is going to come out. That's going to screw up all DPI. If you can no longer man in the middle, so there is no more layer 7 inspection on the wire, SDN or not, what do you do then? Now you've got a new secure protocol, but you can't do identity by looking at how they're communicating. You have to do something else. So it's fun times, let me put it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting as you described it. It really takes me back to my thinking along the way of there'll be a day someday where nobody needs a firewall on a traditional firewall on the network, that everyone will just have a way of securely communicating and authenticating and to people and applications to applications. Right.
And I think that is, by the way, that's a great way of expressing what's zero trust.
Yeah.
Non-zero trust, sort of the default model was I create safe zones. And everybody in my safe zone, they can talk. Non-zero trust is everybody's in the infected world. We're all sitting on an infected network. Right. And so how do I do trust at that point? I kind of look at it like, I'm hoping it's not like the pendulum, but how there's this every 10 years, either there's the advice that infants are supposed to sleep on their side or infants are supposed to sleep on their back. Every 10 years it changes, depending on when you had your kids. And, first, do we have flat networks? Do we have segmented networks? Do we have micro-segmented networks? Do we have flat? Honestly, like in a true zero trust world, the world is flat. I'm a flat earther in this regard, I guess. The world is flat, but everybody is segmented by their identity and their trust. They're just living in a flat world.
Flat earthers have supporters around the globe.
It's for real. The struggle is real.
What's interesting though, I think about people's home firewalls, right? And I think some of us may start to think like, oh, but that's a good application of it, right? Like, don't let anything in, but let everything out, and that's protecting people. And I'm like, but no, we're letting everything out. Or if we're restricting what goes out, now we've got issues. And we even see it when you get down to, okay, well, let's just look at the domain names, and we'll say what's bad and what's not. Even that can be problematic on a user basis. Right. Well, obviously, threat intelligence and enterprise, different story. But from a user basis, right? Like,
how many times have you seen infected DNS servers, and basically you think you're at yahoo.com? You're not.
You're not. Yeah, exactly. There's a million ways to skin that cat. So even in that sense, it's a bad idea.
People still go to yahoo.com.
It didn't say AOL.com.
Oh,
Yahoo.com.
you get those shiny coasters.
Oh, no,
from
what's
there.
that? Wait, no, there's a new name. What did they call it? It's a new name. What's Yahoo's called now?
Oh, that's right.
Oh, did they change their name?
Bankrupt?
No. You got no. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did change its name. Let's find out.
We have Google, so
We
we
have-
can
we
figure
can-
out what Yahoo did, right?
Quick, ask Bing.
Yeah, exactly.
Who?
I went to yahoo.com and it's still called Yahoo.
No,
Yeah.
the website's called Yahoo, but no. Altaba.
Never heard that before.
I was thinking
he
it
just
started
made
with
up a
an
Is
word.
that- is
They're
that-
like in the background going, quick, guys, make up a word, make up a word.
Quick, buy that domain. It's going to be worth a fortune tomorrow.
Is that like Hebrew for bankrupt? I don't know.
Who
It's Alta
is
Vista.
Altaba?
That's anti-Semantic.
Huh.
No, it's got a different name. It's still called Yahoo, but nobody.
It's definitely not called Altaba.
No, it's definitely not. I think it's Kofefi, but
That's right.
Oh, boy. Harry, if people want to learn more, obviously they can go to edgewise.net/security weekly and get it. Now, do you have a demo trial? Like, how are you handling
absolutely.
this?
So you can sign up for a demo. You can sign up for a trial. I think we're doing a special promotion at Security Weekly. So if they want to actually just sign up for a trial where no protection, just no enforcement. We will map out your network and show your exposure. They can do that as well.
Awesome.
And you're giving a panel at RSA, it sounds like.
And I'm hosting a panel at RSA.
Yeah, so go see that.
Yeah, when is the panel? Do you know? Or what's the name of it?
At RSA.
It's at RSA.
At RSA.
During RSA.
It's it's the future state of the firewall 2028.
Who else is on it with you?
So
Harry?
Marcus Raymond, Adam Shostak.
Random, you mean?
Well,
Did you say random? Does it?
We just need more limoncello here.
Well, it's
Potato,
random,
potato.
in this context, we can say Marcus and then Adam Shostak.
Well, you say Damon.
I do say Damon.
So Raynham.
I always wanted to call him Marcus Random.
Adam Shostak.
Adam Shostak and Jennifer, and the last name's evading me. I apologize. But a great panel of
A lot of Jennifers in
Oh,
this
boy.
field. Which Jennifer? Who's she affiliated with?
She's-
IOActive Jennifer or
you can make me look.
North Carolina Jennifer?
I'm going to tell you right now.
Okay.
All right.
We'll look that up.
Well, yeah. I'll look that up while you're.
During the break, we're going to look that up. Right? Yeah. We haven't done 5 questions with you, Harry.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Oh, sweet.
Never been on PSW. Now you've got to answer 5 questions while you look up the Jennifer on your phone.
Manila.
Jennifer Manila. It's North Carolina
thank you.
Jennifer, yes. So,
Thank you.
Harry, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I'm ready to play 5 questions.
Everyone lies to that first question.
Did that count as one scenario?
That doesn't.
I
There's
only got
5
4
more
left.
questions now.
You see, that was just a ruse.
That's right. I guess it's 6
That's
questions.
just practice.
So 3 words to describe yourself. There's
We
no
can edit
right
this
or
pause
wrong
out,
answer.
right?
Energetic.
That one's wrong. I'm just kidding.
Whatever you said to that person, Patrick was going to tell you were wrong.
Vengeful.
I'm parked in the front, by the way.
Inspired.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
No, it would definitely be what's the Japanese sword?
Katana?
Yeah.
Or Wakazashi, depending on the length.
Okay.
Sorry.
Says the sword and knife expert.
I forgot I'm going a guy who makes knives
or the
for a
Tonto,
living.
right? Yeah, the Tonto's the little one.
Forgot we had Tori Hanzo here on the show. If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Wow.
It's a good title.
That's
I like
great.
it. That's
That's
actually
good.
a really good title.
I'm going with that.
Final answer. Final answer.
Library, do you have? Wow.
This one's the easiest one. It's multiple choice. There's only 2 choices. In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
First.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
This is the hard one.
That's what she said.
It's not really multiple choice. It's not really multiple choice.
Well,
There are-
technically it is.
Yeah,
This
kind
is
of.
is.
Lots
I
of
mean, I'm not
choices.
giving you the.
But,
there are
with two syllable, and I'm allowed to have like a little bit of an Oedipus complex here. I
Totally.
assume.
Of course.
It's you have complete creative.
They can even
freedom.
be the same gender if you'd like.
We don't.
Right.
Yeah, we don't judge. It can
Well,
be.
look,
it can be.
Gwyneth Paltrow's my mom. Just laying that out
Sure,
there.
that was an easy.
Yeah, totally
right there.
You know, and I think
Was she Iron? It's Iron Man. Is that correct?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah.
she's not
Gotcha.
Iron Man,
Oh,
she's the
yeah.
assistant.
Yeah. Well, and then what? Yeah, I got you.
Whatever that
My son's getting into Marvel, and we just watched that.
At least they're not getting into DC, because Marvel Universe.
They're favoring Marvel.
I thought that would be the question, like Marvel or DC kind of thing.
Nope.
And so my father, I'm going to have to go with Harrison Ford. I think that's a good-looking couple, and that's just my way of saying I wouldn't be as balding. I'd be much better looking.
I was going to say, what happened?
Harrison Ford and Gwyneth Paltrow had a kid, and Harry popped out, and somebody was lying there.
Somebody was asleep at the
call
switch.
him Harry Ford.
Harry, thank you so much. That was an awesome segment. Harry's, of course, going to stick around. Are you going to stick
Yeah, I'll stick around for a bit.
And you can go to edgewise.net/securityweekly. Make sure you go there, check it out, and get for a month of free workload visibility. A special for Security Weekly listeners. Stay tuned. We're coming back with tonight's technical segment.